It's too often the case that when a band loses their frontman, it's an immediate death sentence for any future successes. But what happens when that lead singer is Peter Gabriel and the band is Genesis? You get a massive single that would transition them from an incredible prog, artsy theatrical rock band to a pop prog commercial sensation. Oh, and their new lead singer? Just a drummer by the name of Mr. Phil Collins. Today, we're going to be talking all about the production, writing, and the odd timing of the song Turn It On Again. Hello there, it's Warren Hewitt here. Hope you're doing marvellously well. Welcome back to another episode of the series. And if you haven't already, please subscribe. If you hit the notification bell, you'll be notified when we have a new video. Of course, if you're into production, you can go to producelikeapro.com and sign up for the email list and get a whole bunch of free goodies. Genesis has an incredible discography, with studio albums spanning 4 decades. And yet in 1980, the band had released 9 studio albums and still hadn't quite crossed over into larger commercial success. Peter Gabriel's departure from the band in 1975 became the catalyst leading them to pop commercial success, with Phil Collins as their new leading man. This new version of the band released several albums, including A Trick of the Tail, Wind and Wuthering, and 1978's And Then There Were Three, which is yet another new configuration of the band after guitarist Steve Hackett had left. In 1978, the band was on a bit of a break. Mike Rutherford and Tony Banks were busy working on their solo albums, Smallcreep's Day and A Curious Feeling, respectively, and reunited with Phil Collins in 1979 to begin working on what would become their next album, Duke, which included the song Turn It On Again. While working on the album Duke, Genesis originally developed a song with the working title Tamia. There wasn't a whole lot to it. It was going to function as a link between the song's guide vocal and Duke's travels. However, as they continued to work on it, they began to see its potential as a full song. This is the song that would ultimately become Turn It On Again. The lyrics for this song were developed by Mike Rutherford and influenced heavily by the 1979 comedy film and book Being There, where a simple-minded man is raised on television alone and is mistaken for an upper-class gentleman. This influence can clearly be seen in the lyrics of Turn It On Again. You're just another face that I know from the TV show. I have known you for so very long, I feel you like a friend. Can't you do anything for me? Can I touch you for a while? Can I meet you another day and we will fly away? Musically, the band began to combine ideas that were leftovers, ideas from other songs they'd been working on, including previous solo projects. Specifically with the second set of verses, Tony Banks explained, "We kind of put Rutherford's riff, the bit he didn't use on Smallcreep's Day, curiously enough, with the bit I didn't use on A Curious Feeling, and put these two together and we made it much more rocky." Both bits became much more rocky. My bit was a little more epic and Mike's was a little bit slower and a little bit more heavy metal. Now, let's take a closer look at this song, starting with the incredible guitar part. So this is a great guitar riff. Firstly, every live video, everything I've ever seen with Mike Rutherford playing this riff is using a Strat. And it sounds like it probably is a Strat, but the beauty of this part, this intro guitar part, this verse guitar part, which is so iconic, is it blends in with the keys as well. So there's kind of a slight chorusing effect of them against each other, which is really gorgeous. So I did a little bit of online research to see if anybody was playing it the way that I thought you should play it. And it's really conflicting. There's loads of different things. So after a little bit of research, we discovered that Mike actually tunes the top E on his guitar to a D. So the highest string is actually a D. Now, in this intro, it's not going to work on every single chord, which he said in an interview that he doesn't use it all of the time, but he does use it to add some kind of, some depth to some of these chords. The first part of the riff is the E to A to E. And so for the E chord, he's just playing an E, G sharp, and open B. And then for the A, he's playing an E, A, and a C sharp. And you get this. Then he slides all the way up to the B chord, which is just 3 notes, just a basic B major triad. and then it descends to the F sharp major triad, which is, so it's the first inversion. So you get this. So the second half of the riff is a root third fifth of the G and the A, and it slides backwards and forwards, and it slides all the way up to the D shape, which is on the 12th fret here, the 11th and the 10th fret. Then it's got that first inversion A chord, and then first inversion G chord. But what is beautiful about this is you can employ his open string. So that together, you get this. So that's the chord sequence, which of course is very cool, especially with that top E tuned down a tone. But there's even more to it than that, because it's an odd meter. The first time you hear the riff, for instance, it's 2 bars of 4 followed by a bar of 4 and 3. You could say a bar of 7. As soon as the band comes in, the first part of the riff actually goes from a 4/4 to a 2/4 to a bar of 7. Or you could say a 6/4. So it's a little bit of a conundrum. So let's play through that intro time you hear it, and then a couple of times around in the verse so you can hear it. I've seen people write this loads of different ways. I've seen it written as a 6/4 or a 6/8, and I've seen it written as a 7/4 or a 7/8. Whichever way you want to write it is fine. But it's a really, really cool guitar riff. I've always loved it from the first time I've heard it, and it's always baffled me until I actually sat down and, figured out the details. But the icing on the cake was finding out that Mike Rutherford tuned the top E down to a D, giving us this. Really fantastic. Genesis recorded Turn It On Again and the entirety of the album Duke at Polar Studios in Stockholm, Sweden. This is the studio owned by ABBA members Bjorn Ulvaeus and Benny Andersson, and where multiple ABBA albums were recorded. In addition to ABBA and Genesis, Polar Studios was also where Led Zeppelin's final studio album, In Through the Outdoor, was recorded in 1979. The foundation of this song begins with Mike Rutherford's oddly timed guitar riff, which we just explored a few moments ago. When he presented it to the band, it was actually a much slower tempo. Collins had the idea of speeding it up, but as Rutherford explained, Phil said, "Why don't you try it at a faster speed?" And then he said to me, "Do you realize it is in 13/8? And I said, "What do you mean it's in 13? It's in 4/4, isn't it?" "No, it's 13. Layered on top of this complicated guitar part are keyboards played by Tony Banks. Tony had a very large keyboard setup for the Duke tour, made up of 6 keyboards. These keyboards included a Hammond T102 organ, Yamaha CP70 electric grand piano, ARP quadrasynth, ARP 2600 synth, a Sequential Circuits Prophet 5 synth, and a Roland keyboard vocoder. All of these keyboards were then controlled with a 12-channel custom mixer desk combined with an MXR digital delay, as well as a mix of other MXR, Roland, and Boss effects. To power this massive set of keyboards, they used Crown and Quad power amps with customized cabinets to match. The primary keyboard on Turn It On Again appears to be the Yamaha Electric Grand, with some chorusing added. Bringing up the low end is the pulsating bass effect. Now, you have to remember, this is from the time before sequences. The sound you hear is actually Rutherford using his fists to trigger the pedals on a Moog Taurus in real time. Anytime he got tired, Collins was there to take over. And then there's the thing that ties this whole song together, the drums. The well-known riff is in 13/8 or 13/4, depending on who you ask, with the various structures of the song form seeming to alternate between different combinations of 6/4, 7/4, 4/4, and 5/4. Regardless of how you interpret it, it is a bit confusing, but Collins maintains a steady, modified backbeat throughout. Tony Banks recalls when Phil Collins came up with the drum part, stating, "And then Phil gave it a much more straightforward drum part. Perhaps neither of us would have thought that we would want it on that bit. The drum part is more straightforward, but still a bit confusing. It feels like a backbeat groove, but because of the time changes, it doesn't quite line up. It's so confusing, in fact, that when Peter Gabriel reunited with his Genesis bandmates at the Six of the Best show in 1982, he had a difficult time playing it, as Tony Banks recalls. It was typical Peter. Oh, I can play this. But once he started playing, he kept looking around like, oh, Turn It On Again does funny things. It's truly a Genesis song." So let's take a quick listen to the instruments on Turn It On Again and listen for these time changes being tied together by the drums. Note that the hi-hat stays on steady eighths while everything else is in an odd meter. Phil Collins not only brings the perfect drumming to the song, but also an incredible vocal performance. Collins had taken over as lead vocalist after Gabriel's departure in 1975, and many people noted that Collins' voice sounded very similar to Gabriel's. Collins had sung background vocals behind Peter Gabriel for years, so it makes sense he was able to blend with him, and ended up sounding like him when he took over as lead vocalist. The new role took some getting used to for Collins, as he recalls. "I'd gotten used to hearing the band from behind the drum kit, and the sound changed drastically, which was a weird thing to get used to. Previously, I live in my own little band. Suddenly, I was exposed. But I found that once we had done the first gig, which was in London, Ontario, things started to settle down." Phil Collins may have had a bit of an adjustment period as he took over as lead vocalist, sounding very much like Peter Gabriel, but with Turn It On Again, we hear Collins coming into his own as a singer. He's got some incredible vocal chops and an incredibly soulful tone.
All I need is a TV show, that and the radio. Down on my luck again, down on my luck again. I can show you some of the people in my life. I can show you some of the people in my life.
Of course, the final piece of this incredible song is the producer. One of the biggest influences to Genesis and their newly refined sound had a lot to do with engineer and producer David Henschel. Henschel first began his career as a recording engineer at the now very well-known Trident Studios in London. His first day of work was actually spent making tea for David Bowie's Space Oddity session in July of 1969. After pursuing a musical education where he spent his youth playing keyboards and guitar with schoolmates, he found himself among some of the most influential engineers, such as Roy Thomas Baker, Robin Cable, Mike Stone, and Ken Scott. This formidable team would define contemporary music in the subsequent decades. Because Henschel was the only musically trained engineer at Trident, he became the very first programmer and session synthesizer player in the country. Henschel continued to make a name for himself, working with artists like Elton John, Queen, and Paul McCartney, as well as Genesis through multiple iterations of the band. In his book, Not Dead Yet, Phil Collins recalled what it was like working with Henschel on A Trick of the Tail, their first album without Peter Gabriel. "We got into Trident with a new co-producer, David Henschel, and record at a cracking pace. We're really pleased with these songs. They're sounding strong, fresh, and a bit different. We feel like a new band, and we're sounding like it." David Henschel was not only a great producer for Genesis, but by Collins' admission, helped define the sound of the new Genesis. This development of Genesis post-Peter Gabriel continued on 1976's Wind and Wuthering, as well as 1978's And Then There Were Three, where Henschel was also the producer. It seems that with Henschel producing, Genesis was able to grow into their new sound, fully arriving with the recording and release of Turn It On Again and Duke. Turn It On Again was released on March the 8th, 1980 in the UK, peaking at number 8 and reaching number 58 in the US when it was released in August of the same year. It remains a favorite of Genesis fans and has been performed at every Genesis show since its release. But more than chart numbers, this song continued Genesis' evolution from theatrical prog rock to more radio-friendly pop. Though, to be fair, they were still absolutely Genesis. I can think of no other pop song that has a more complicated meter than this song. The profits from the album Duke allowed Genesis to build their own studio in Surrey, The Farm, where subsequent albums were recorded and they continued to flourish commercially. Genesis would go on to release many more incredible songs and albums throughout the 80s and 90s, but this album, and this song specifically, was a turning point for the band. In addition to this, it was a turning point for Phil Collins. While Tony Banks and Mike Rutherford had already released solo albums, it wasn't until after Turn It On Again in 1981 that Phil Collins released his solo debut, Face Value, which would go on to be a massive success. With Turn It On Again, Genesis had found their own voice, just as Phil Collins had found his. Thank you ever so much. Please subscribe, check out the other videos in this series, and thank you ever so much for watching. See you all again very soon.